They've always said it like that. Just a nurse. 3 words, light as a feather, heavy as concrete. I first heard it during my second year of nursing school, when Emily, my older sister, had just started her 3rd year of med school. We were at some family barbecue, one of those sunny afternoons where everyone drinks too much and talks too loud. Someone asked us both what we were studying, and before I could answer, Emily jumped in, "I'm in med school." And Chloe's, "Just doing nursing." It wasn't even malicious. It was casual, automatic. As if she were reading it off a label she'd already printed in her head. I laughed then, trying to brush it off, pretending not to notice the way my uncle's eyebrows rose in slight disappointment. Pretending not to notice how no one followed up with a question about my classes, my clinicals, my 12-hour shifts in the ER as a student who still hadn't learned how to cry in private. They only asked Emily things. What kind of doctor do you want to be? Do you get to use the stethoscope already? Do you think Grey's Anatomy is realistic? I'd sip my drink and smile. Always smiling. That was the game I learned to play early. Make them comfortable with your silence, because your voice won't be enough anyway. By the time I graduated and started working in the ICU, the gap between us had widened. Emily wore her title like a crown. Dr. Emily Harding. It was always introduced with pride at events. "This is my daughter Emily, she's a doctor." Then, with a brief turn of the head, "And this is Chloe, she's a nurse." Sometimes, they wouldn't even say that much. Just a nod. Just my name. Just Chloe. The funny thing is, I loved nursing. I still do. Not despite the pain, the blood, the sorrow of holding someone's hand as they slip away. But because of it. Because every day, I touch lives in the most vulnerable moments. I advocate for the voiceless. I stand between panic and peace, but love doesn't protect you from comparison. Especially when that comparison is sitting across from you at every family table, dressed in tailored blazers and pearls, talking about surgeries and breakthroughs while sipping wine she didn't pour herself. At some point, the jabs turned into jokes. "Don't worry, Chloe can clean that, she's a nurse. If someone faints, at least we've got Chloe, or do we call the real doctor?" Laughter. Always laughter. And I would join in, just enough to not look bitter. Our mother never corrected them. If anything, she joined. She was the one who framed Emily's medical degree in gold and hung it above the fireplace. Mine? She never even asked if I got one. The day I passed my licensing exam, I called her with my voice shaking from pride and exhaustion. Her first response? "That's nice. So when are you going to go back for med school?" That stuck with me. Like a splinter I couldn't dig out. Not because I needed her to be proud of me as much as I needed her to stop seeing me as some failed version of Emily. I didn't become a nurse because I couldn't be a doctor. I became a nurse because I wanted to be one. I wanted to be on the ground, present, hands-on. I didn't want to diagnose and disappear. I wanted to stay, but that's not the story my family tells about me. To them, I'm the one who fell short, the one who settles, the one who makes enough to live but not enough to impress. Emily got married 3 years ago. It was a massive wedding, full of ivory flowers and speeches about success and family pride. I was a bridesmaid, of course. She let me be one, after all. I remember standing there in a sea of champagne-colored silk, smiling as people toasted to her brilliance, her drive, her status. No one toasted me, but I didn't expect them to. I'd stopped expecting that a long time ago. They don't ask about my job. They don't know about the 72-hour shifts. About the time I held a mother's body still after her son died on the table. About the child with leukemia who called me her hero. About the man who couldn't speak, but squeezed my hand as I adjusted his oxygen for the last time. They don't ask, because they don't want to know. Because it complicates the narrative they've built. I'm not bitter. At least, that's what I tell myself. But it still stings when I see them gather for dinners and I'm not invited. Or worse, when I am, but only as the shadow of the real star. Emily's daughter, Lily, is 6 now. She's the only one who doesn't treat me like I'm made of less. She calls me Aunt Coco. She draws me pictures. She doesn't care that I'm not a doctor. She only cares that I read her favorite bedtime story twice and always remember the voices. Sometimes I think Lily sees me more clearly than anyone else in this family ever has. Sometimes I think the only reason I still show up is for her. It's not that I need validation. It's that every time someone says just a nurse, a part of me wonders if they'll ever realize who they call when the bleeding doesn't stop, when the breath slows, when the machines scream and the doctor's already left the room. They call me, but maybe one day they'll see what Lily already knows, that I'm not just anything, that I'm Chloe, and I'm the one who stays. It was a Saturday evening, late spring, the kind where the air still carried that lingering warmth of daylight even after sunset. My mother had sent a message to the family group chat the week before, dinner at our place. Bring stories, bring wine, bring your best smiles. That last part always made me laugh. In our family, smiles were often worn like armor, tight and polished, but hollow inside. I wasn't going to go at first. I had just finished 4 consecutive night shifts in the ICU and my body felt like it had been stitched together with gauze and caffeine. But then I saw Lily's name under my sister's RSVP. Emily plus Lily will be there, and that was enough. The promise of a small pair of arms wrapping around my legs the moment I walked in the door, yeah, that was enough. When I arrived, the house was already buzzing. Laughter spilled out through the screen door, mingling with the scent of rosemary, chicken and the faint trail of perfume that always seemed to hover around my mother like a halo. I stepped in quietly, unsure if anyone would even notice I'd come. Look who finally decided to show up, my cousin Adam said, dramatically, checking a non-existent watch. Did a hospital collapse or something? Laughter followed, light and sharp. I smiled politely and stepped further in, scanning for Lily. Emily spotted me before I found her. She stood near the kitchen island, in a perfectly pressed blouse and tailored pants, sipping white wine. She always looked like a magazine cover, confident, curated. Her voice carried across the room as she told a story about some neurology case she had handled. This man had the worst tremor you've ever seen, like full-on Michael J. Fox levels, and the attending just froze. So I took the lead, ordered a brain MRI, and boom, AVM. The group around her nodded, impressed. Mom beamed. I'd heard that tone before, the effortless authority, the practiced pauses, the need to assert herself as the smartest person in the room. And I used to think it was just who she was, until I realized it was also who they made her feel she needed to be. The family's pride. The one with letters after her name, Chloe. Someone finally acknowledged me. It was Aunt Meredith. Kind and always slightly out of touch. How's nursing? She asked, like the word had left a sour taste in her mouth. It's good, I said, grabbing a drink from the counter. Busy week in the ICU, but rewarding. Still doing nights? My uncle chimed in. Yikes. Don't know how you do it. I'd go insane. I need sunlight. Real jobs have sunlight. Again, laughter. My drink suddenly didn't taste like anything. I wanted to say something. To explain that night shifts are when the real things happen, when people die, when families crumble, when nurses like me are the only ones left standing at 3:43 a.m. trying to make peace with a monitor that's flatlined. But instead, I nodded, smiled, and disappeared into the wallpaper of the evening. Emily's stories continued. About saving a high-profile patient, about giving a talk at a med school seminar. Dad poured her more wine like a waiter, proud and reverent. I looked around the room and realized I could leave and no one would ask where I went. I was physically there, but I wasn't part of anything unfolding. It was like watching a movie with the sound muted. I finally sat near the fireplace, alone. The room pulsed around me, laughter, chatter, the occasional clink of glass. My mother sat with Emily, leaning in like she was absorbing wisdom from the Oracle of Delphi. Every time Emily spoke, the room got quieter. Every time I did, it moved on faster. Eventually, someone asked Emily about her latest speaking engagement, and she launched into a well-rehearsed story. They flew me out to Chicago for this neuro-oncology summit, she said. All expenses paid, of course. It was insane. I was on a panel with a guy who's published like 50 papers. But I held my own. I waited for the right moment. I'd had a patient last week, a girl no older than Lily, in for post-chemo complications. And I'd stayed 2 hours past my shift just to hold her hand while she vomited and shook and cried. I'd been the only one she trusted to bathe her. That was my story. It was quiet, but real. And for a split second, I thought maybe they'd listen. So I cleared my throat. Actually, we had a patient in the ICU this week, a teenager, really sick post-chemo. Her parents couldn't visit because of travel restrictions, so I stayed. Oh, Emily interrupted, turning to my mom. Did I tell you what Dr. Singh said to me after my presentation? He said I reminded him of a young Atul Gawande. Can you believe that? The room shifted immediately, as if I'd never spoken. I sat back. No one noticed. No one asked me to finish. Even Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, and that was it. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. It was something else, like grief, maybe. Grief for the version of me that used to hope things would change. For the version that thought showing up, staying late, doing good work, that any of it would matter to these people. But I realized, in that moment, that I could vanish from this family, and the only person who'd truly miss me would be 6 years old and unable to spell the word resentment. It was almost poetic, really, to be surrounded by so many people and still feel like a ghost. So I got up. I kissed Lily gently on the forehead. I told my mom I had to leave early, shift in the morning. She barely looked up, just nodded and said, "That's our nurse. Always working." As I walked to the door, I heard Emily laugh again, loud and unbothered. I smiled to myself, not bitterly, but with clarity. One day, I thought, they'll know what it means to have a nurse in the family. They'll learn when it matters most. But tonight, I let them sit in their own illusion, and I disappeared. Without ever leaving, the morning after that dinner, I woke up with a kind of emotional hangover that no amount of coffee could fix. I lay in bed longer than I should have, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment from the night before. Every interruption, every half-smile, every time I tried to speak and was met with silence or a redirected conversation. It was always like that, and still, some part of me hoped it wouldn't be. I checked my phone out of habit. No missed calls. No messages. Not even a simple thanks for coming from my mom. It shouldn't have surprised me. But it did. I scrolled through the family group chat, not really looking for anything specific, just searching for proof that I hadn't imagined the entire evening. And that's when I saw it. It was a thread from 2 nights ago, one I hadn't been tagged in, buried between a forwarded prayer meme and a blurry photo of someone's cat. Emily had sent it. The message was simple, almost flippant. She always wanted to be a doctor, remember? But she didn't have the drive. Dropped out halfway and became a nurse. Nothing wrong with that, just not the same, you know? There was a laughing emoji at the end. My stomach dropped. I read it again. Then again. My heart didn't race, it slowed. My body didn't heat up with anger, it went cold. It was like watching a slow-motion punch coming and choosing not to dodge it. The group had responded, of course. A couple of LOLs. A classic Chloe. Someone even replied with, "Better than nothing." And that was what shattered me. Not just Emily's words, but the chorus of casual cruelty that followed. They didn't think they were being cruel. That was the worst part. It was all a joke to them. A shared inside joke where I was the punchline, and they'd been laughing for years. I didn't respond. I just closed the chat and sat there, the silence of my apartment pressing in on me. It wasn't the first time Emily had talked about me like that. It was just the first time I saw it spelled out, preserved in digital ink for me to hold in my hands. I had always known that she saw me as lesser. She never said it to my face, of course. That would have been too honest. Instead, she smiled tightly. At family functions, made veiled comments like "you're doing your best, that's what counts," or "not everyone's cut out for med school." All wrapped in the tone of someone giving a compliment while twisting the knife, and I let it slide. Again and again. Because I didn't want to be the dramatic one, the sensitive one, the one who couldn't take a joke. But this was different. This was deliberate. I thought about all the nights I'd come home from 12-hour shifts with aching feet and a full heart, because I'd helped someone take their first steps after surgery, or sat with a dying patient when no one else would, or calmed a terrified mother whose child had stopped breathing. I thought about the hands I'd held, the blood I'd cleaned, the words I'd whispered to strangers just before they died. I thought about the teenage girl who'd overdosed last fall and grabbed my wrist and cried, "Don't let me go." And I hadn't, but to my sister, I was still just a nurse. Not brave, Not skilled, not relentless, just someone who couldn't hack it in med school. I spent the whole day in a fog. Went to the grocery store, folded laundry, took a walk. But the message followed me like a shadow. Every smile from a stranger felt like a reminder that the people who were supposed to love me didn't even respect me. That evening, I called my best friend, Miriam. She was a nurse too. We'd met in school and gone through hell together. During our residency, she was the only one who understood. When I told her about the message, she didn't say ignore it or she didn't mean it. She said, "I'm sorry. That's not okay." Just those words. And I started crying, not because of the message, but because finally, someone didn't try to explain it away. "She's jealous," Miriam said after I pulled myself together. I laughed through the tears. "Of me? She might not even realize it," she said. "But you have something she doesn't. Compassion without the ego. You walk into chaos every day and don't need applause for it." That stuck with me. Compassion without the ego. That night, I reopened the message thread. I didn't reply. I didn't start a fight. I didn't correct them or demand an apology. Instead, I did something petty, maybe, but it felt right. I changed my profile photo to one of me in full scrubs, arms crossed, standing in the ICU next to a ventilator. No filters. No makeup. Just me, the version of me they never cared to see, and I left the group, not dramatically. No announcement. Just, gone. It took 3 days for someone to notice. My aunt messaged me privately, "Everything okay, sweetie? Noticed you left the chat." I typed, "I'm fine." Then deleted it. I typed, "Just tired of being laughed at." Then deleted that too. Eventually, I just sent, "Yes, needed some space," and left it at that. A week passed. Then too, Emily didn't reach out. Neither did my mother, but one night, I came home from a long shift and found a note slipped under my door. It was from Lily, crayon handwriting, big and clumsy. "I love you, Tia Coco. You make me feel safe." And that was everything. Let them talk. Let them laugh in their little group chats. Let Emily think she's the sun around which everyone orbits. I know who I am. I know what I do matters, and next time they call me just a nurse, I'll smile, because just a nurse is the reason someone's daughter still breathes. It's strange, isn't it, how the smallest people can make the biggest difference in your life? I never thought I'd find refuge in a child's arms, especially not the child of the person who made me feel like I was never enough. But that's exactly what Lily became for me. My safe place. My quiet reminder that what I do matters, even if my own family refuses to see it. Lily was born when I was in my second year working night shifts at the hospital. I still remember the day Emily called me, not to invite me to the baby shower, of course, that would have been too generous, but to ask if I'd be on call in case something went wrong during the birth. Not as her sister, as a medical backup. I wanted to be offended, but I knew Emily too well. It was her version of peacemaking, clinical, calculated, and never quite personal. Still, when Lily came into the world, I was there. Not in the delivery room, I wasn't allowed, but right outside, watching the monitors, listening to the rhythms of life and pain. When the nurse handed Emily her daughter, she looked radiant. Exhausted, but glowing in that way only new mothers do. And when she caught my eye through the glass, she nodded once. No smile. No tears. Just a nod, like, "Okay, you can exist here." What Emily never knew is that the first time Lily cried, I cried too. Not for the usual reasons, but because I felt something shift deep in me, a strange kind of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this little girl wouldn't inherit the pettiness. Maybe she'd see me for who I really was. The bond between us didn't happen overnight. It was subtle, almost accidental. At family events, birthdays, holidays, random barbecues, Lily always gravitated toward me. At first, it was convenience. I was the one who would sit on the floor with her and build block towers or draw crooked unicorns in coloring books while the adults argued over politics and mortgages. But over time, it became something more. She started calling me Tia Coco before she could even pronounce my real name. At first, Emily corrected her, "It's Chloe, sweetie, not Coco." But Lily was stubborn in the most endearing way. She kept saying it. And when she did, something warm flickered in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. When Lily was 3, she had a fever that wouldn't break. Emily panicked and rushed her to the ER, the same one I happened to be working in that night. I remember seeing her name pop up on the intake sheet, and my heart clenched. I rushed to the pediatric wing just as Emily was filling out forms, her hands trembling, mascara smudged. "She's burning up," she said. I didn't know who to call. I didn't know where to go. I took Lily in my arms, felt the heat radiating off her tiny body, and guided them through triage. I stayed. Through the 4, the labs, the tears. I calmed Emily down when the doctors muttered about possible infections, and I stayed even after my shift ended. I held Lily until she finally fell asleep, her little hand wrapped around my thumb. The next morning, Emily left without saying much. "No thank you, no, I'm glad you were here." Just a tired nod, her version of acknowledgement. But Lily woke up, saw me still there in my scrubs, and smiled the kind of smile that tears you open. "You stayed," she whispered. "I always will," I said. And I meant it. From that moment on, our bond was sealed. At family events, she would run straight into my arms, bypassing her grandparents, even her own parents. I became the keeper of her secrets. The one who knew which cartoons she loved, which vegetables she hated, and which plush toys she couldn't sleep without. She once told me, "You're my hero, Tia Coco," and I laughed. But deep down, it undid me. Emily hated it. I could see it in her eyes. The way she clenched her jaw whenever Lily chose to sit with me instead of her. The way she would suddenly come over and scoop Lily up mid-conversation, as if trying to reclaim something. As if my presence somehow diluted her motherhood. But what could she say? What could she do? I never overstepped. I never corrected. I never flaunted the bond. I just existed. And Lily kept coming to me. One night, during a particularly cold Thanksgiving dinner, Lily pulled me aside and whispered, "Mommy says you're not important like she is. But I think you're magic." I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I knelt down, looked her in the eyes, and said, "We're all a little bit magic when we're kind. Don't forget that." She never brought it up again, but I could tell it stayed with her. Over time, being just a nurse to my family stopped mattering to me. Because to Lily, I was so much more. I was warmth in a cold room. I was safety in a storm. I was the adult who always listened, always noticed, always made time, and I did it without expectation. Without needing credit. Without the applause Emily always chased. Looking back now, I realized that Lily became my anchor in a sea of rejection. Every time I wanted to stop showing up to those awful dinners, I thought of her little face lighting up when I walked through the door. Every time I wanted to give up on my family entirely, I thought of her giggles, her whispered secrets, her tiny hand in mine. She reminded me that the work I do, the love I give, the person I am, it all matters. Even if the adults in the room are too blind to see it. Emily may be the one with the framed diplomas and the fancy title. But I'm the one Lily runs to when she scrapes her knee. I'm the one who knows how to braid her hair just right. I'm the one who made her believe in magic, and in the end, that means more to me than any title ever could. It started with a group message, one of those overly cheerful, emoji-filled invitations that pretends to sound inclusive but feels like a memo from HR. Emily had organized a party for Lily's 5th birthday. Pink decorations, princess theme, bounce house in the backyard. "A magical day for a magical girl," she wrote. I stared at the message longer than I should have, rereading every passive-aggressive undertone. "We'd love to have everyone there. Chloe, maybe you could lend a hand with the kids, since you're so good at that stuff." It wasn't a request. It wasn't a real invitation. It was a role assignment. Still, I said yes. Not because I wanted to play the help, but because I couldn't let Lily down. That little girl thought the world of me, and her smile was worth 1,000 cuts from Emily's tongue. I told myself I'd go, bring a gift, stay for a bit, then leave quietly. I arrived early, which in hindsight was probably a mistake. Emily greeted me at the door with that smile she reserved for acquaintances she despised but had to entertain. Perfect timing. The balloons need to be tied to the railing, and the cupcake stand still needs arranging, she chirped, as if I had shown up for a shift. Before I could respond, she handed me a roll of pink ribbon and a checklist. There was no "Hi, Chloe, no thanks for coming." Just delegation. The kind you give to someone you've decided isn't quite a guest, but also not quite a stranger. I looked around. No one else had been given tasks. The cousins were lounging by the pool. Her husband was grilling burgers and laughing with friends. I was the only one working. I tied the ribbons, arranged the cupcakes, set the plastic forks by color, pink, then purple, then white, just as she'd listed on her clipboard. I even rehung the glitter banner that had started to sag. I told myself it didn't matter, that Lily would be thrilled, that this wasn't about Emily, that it was just another example of how she needed control. But then came the moment that truly cut. Guests had started arriving. The backyard was filled with chatter, camera flashes, children bouncing wildly on the inflatable castle. I had just finished fixing the icing on a smudged cake when Emily's voice rang out, sharp and theatrical, just loud enough to gather attention. "Everyone, a round of applause for Nurse Chloe here," she said, holding up her mimosa like she was hosting a charity gala. "She's been amazing. Honestly, she's more comfortable with chaos than anyone else I know. It's what she does for a living, after all. Cleaning up messes." There were polite laughs, some chuckles, a few raised eyebrows. I froze. In that moment, I wasn't Chloe. I wasn't the woman who had stayed overnight at the hospital 3 times that week, tending to post-op trauma patients. I wasn't the professional who'd been praised by her supervisor just days before for catching a critical mistake in a patient's chart. I was just Nurse Chloe, the help, the one who knows how to deal with messes. What hurt more than the words was the reaction. My own mother laughed. A short, embarrassed chuckle, but still. No one stepped in. No one said, "Hey, that was unnecessary." I stood there, icing still on my hands, staring at a group of people who had spent years pretending to see me, just enough to feel good about themselves. I wanted to leave. Every instinct in my body told me to walk away. But then I saw Lily. She was wearing a tiara 2 sizes too big, running toward me with her arms outstretched and icing on her cheeks. "Tia Coco," she squealed. "You came." And just like that, my anger turned to resolve. I knelt down, hugged her tightly, and whispered, I wouldn't miss it for the world. We played hide and seek behind the garden shed. I helped her climb into the bounce house. I even fixed her shoe when the strap broke. For Lily, I was magic. For Emily, I was invisible until I was useful. But I refused to let that define the day. Later, when it was time for the cake, Emily asked me to help gather the kids. "You're good at crowd control," she said with a smirk, like I was a bouncer instead of her sister. I nodded silently, stood up, and calmly called the kids over. But I made a point to stand beside Lily as she blew out her candles. And when everyone clapped, I whispered in her ear, "Make the biggest wish you can. You're allowed to dream big." She looked at me and smiled. "Like you?" My throat tightened. "Exactly. Like me," I said. The party wound down after that. Guests began to leave. The sun dipped low, casting a golden hue over the backyard. Emily had disappeared somewhere, likely inside, already planning her next event. I stayed behind to help Lily open her gifts. When she reached mine, a handmade bracelet with her name engraved and a tiny charm of a stethoscope, she gasped. "I love it," she shouted, and immediately put it on. "You're gonna be a nurse like me one day?" I teased. She paused, thoughtful. "No, I'm gonna be like you. But maybe I'll be a doctor and a nurse." "Even better," I said, tears threatening. I left shortly after. Emily never thanked me. She didn't walk me to the door or acknowledge the fact that I had spent the day making sure everything went smoothly. But that was fine, because I had done it for Lily. And because I knew something she didn't. Point one day, when Lily grows up and looks back on those birthdays, she won't remember the balloon colors or the fancy cake. She'll remember the woman who knelt beside her. The one who made her laugh, made her feel seen, and taught her that kindness was strength. Emily could keep her spotlight. I had something brighter. I remember the exact second it happened. It wasn't cinematic. There was no dramatic music, no sudden gasp from a crowd like in the movies. It began with a small cough. That's all. A little puff of air from Lily's throat. I was crouching beside the gift table, trying to find the missing thank you cards Emily had asked for, because of course she had forgotten where she put them and asked me to be a dear and look. I wasn't paying attention to anything else, just trying to keep my face neutral while sifting through pink envelopes and glitter tape. Then, the second cough came, sharper, louder. My ears pricked up. I turned my head slowly, scanning the yard. The other kids were still running around, squealing, their princess dresses and superhero capes flying behind them like banners of innocence. Emily was laughing near the grill with her husband, a glass of rose in hand, flipping her hair like she was in the middle of a shampoo commercial. But something was off. There was a kind of ripple in the air. That tiny shift you feel when something in your body goes on alert before your mind fully catches up, and then I saw her. Lily, she was clutching her throat, her little hands pressing tightly against her neck, eyes wide, face already tinged with a flush of red. She wasn't coughing anymore. She was silent. Desperately silent, everything else around me blurred. The edges of the party faded into gray noise. My body moved before my brain fully registered it. I stood and sprinted. "Move!" I yelled, pushing past a folding chair, knocking over a tray of juice boxes. Lily! She was near the cupcake table, surrounded by a group of kids who hadn't realized what was happening. I shoved them aside, not gently, and dropped to my knees. Her eyes were watering, mouth open, but no sound. She was trying to breathe, and failing. I didn't panic. I couldn't afford to. "She's choking!" I shouted, only. Then did the screams begin. Adults turned. Someone dropped a plate. Emily shrieked. "Lily?" I placed my arms around Lily's small torso, made a fist just above her belly button, and began the Heimlich. One thrust. Nothing. Second. Third. I could hear my own breath, short and deliberate. Her body was so small. Too small. I adjusted my position, pulled again. On the fourth thrust, a glob of chewed-up candy burst from her mouth and hit the grass. She coughed violently and gasped. The moment she cried out, the sound ripped through me. Relief like a punch to the chest. I held her tightly, rocking her back and forth, whispering, "You're okay, baby. You're okay. Just breathe. I've got you." Emily fell to her knees beside us, sobbing, arms shaking as she reached for her daughter. But Lily clung to me. Her tiny fingers dug into my back. She didn't want to let go. I looked around. Silence, dozens of people, frozen mid-motion. Mothers, fathers, cousins, all standing there like they had been paused by some divine remote control. Some had their hands over their mouths. Some were crying. The same people who'd laughed when Emily joked that I was good with messes. The same ones who barely heard me speak at dinner, who let my words fall flat so many times before no one said anything. Finally, Emily whispered, "She was choking?" I didn't see. I didn't respond. I was too focused on Lily. Her breathing was stabilizing, but her face was still pale, her body trembling in my arms. I didn't want to let her go, and more than that, I didn't want her to be passed around like a show and tell exhibit for people who hadn't cared to notice her. Distress until it had turned into a crisis. Eventually, someone suggested we go inside. A cousin brought a glass of water. Emily carried Lily into the house, and I followed, my hands shaking now that the adrenaline was starting to crash. Once inside, I helped lay Lily on the couch, checked her pulse, looked at her pupils. Everything seemed okay. I asked her if anything else hurt. She shook her head. "I was eating fast," she murmured. "Didn't chew." I brushed her hair back. "It's okay. You're safe." Emily sat on the armrest, one hand over her mouth, eyes red and swollen. "I didn't even notice," she whispered again. "She was right there, still," I said. Nothing. I sat with Lily for nearly an hour. People came in to peek, to whisper, to ask if she was all right. Some offered awkward praise. "You saved her. That was amazing. You stayed calm." A few tried to make light of it. "Guess it pays to have a nurse in the family, huh?" But none of it mattered. What stayed with me wasn't the chaos or the shock. It was the moment right after Lily started breathing again. That second of deafening quiet. Of raw, undeniable clarity. It was the first time I had ever felt like everyone truly saw me. Not as Emily's sister. Not as just a nurse, but as someone who mattered. Someone who knew what to do when no one else did. Someone who could be counted on when it mattered most. That moment, when the laughter stopped, that was when I reclaimed my dignity. The party never fully resumed. People lingered, uncomfortable. The energy had shifted. The decorations, the cake, the presents, they suddenly felt trivial, disposable. As if the illusion of control that Emily clung to so tightly had cracked in front of everyone, and now no one quite knew how to react. I left quietly. No big goodbye. No dramatic statement. I kissed Lily's forehead and whispered that I'd visit her next week. She nodded sleepily. Emily didn't stop me. She was still on the couch, staring at the floor, one hand resting on her daughter's ankle like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality. I walked to my car in silence, and for once, I didn't feel like I was shrinking away from something. I felt taller. I sat in my car with my hands resting on the wheel, but I didn't start the engine right away. The silence outside was thick, like the air had absorbed the tension that still buzzed under my skin. The yard behind me was still lit, still colorful, still full of balloons and laughter faintly restarting in spurts as if people were trying to push the afternoon back into its planned rhythm. But they couldn't. Not really. The current had changed. Something in the structure of that party, and maybe in our family, had cracked open. I wasn't just another face in the background anymore. Not the sister who showed up with a salad, or offered to do the dishes while the real conversations happened without her. Not the nurse who everyone assumed was just playing dress-up compared to Emily's shining title. For the first time, I felt the weight of being the one everyone had to look at, because when the moment came, when it really mattered, I was the only one who had done anything at all, and still, I didn't feel victorious. There was no satisfaction, not really. I didn't feel like I had proven anything to them because I never should have had to prove anything to begin with. Saving Lily wasn't about reclaiming a place at the table or getting a thank you speech or finally making Emily see my worth. It was instinct. It was love. It was what I'd trained to do, yes, but it was also who I was. And that, being who I am, had never been enough for them until now. The image of Lily's face, pale, terrified, and then, finally, flushed with color again, wouldn't leave me. The way she clung to me afterward, burying her face in my shoulder like I was the only person in the world who could keep her safe, haunted me. It was the kind of bond that didn't ask for applause. It just was. Real, pure, and, in its own way, devastating. I thought about how many moments I had swallowed over the years. Times when Emily made snide comments dressed in pearls of sarcasm, hidden just well enough to make everyone else laugh but sharp enough to slice through my pride. The dinners where my father asked about her surgeries and then turned to me with a passing, still doing nights, like I was a cashier working a side job. The way my mother only mentioned me when she needed help organizing prescriptions or wanted me to call Aunt Rita about her blood pressure again. I had accepted it, absorbed it, made it part of my personality, even becoming the reliable one, the background support, the calm fixer of problems. But today shattered something, not just for them, but for me. As I sat there in the driver's seat, I realized how far I had bent myself to fit into their narrative. A story where I was a side character, a helper, a seat filler in family photos who didn't need a spotlight. I had folded parts of myself down so small that I forgot they were even there. And it took the near death of a child I loved more than anything to force that truth into the open. When I finally pulled away from the curb, my heart was thudding, not with fear, but with a quiet resolve I hadn't felt before. The kind that wraps around your spine and makes you sit up a little straighter, not because anyone is watching, but because you finally feel the shape of your own worth. I drove slowly, taking the long route home, letting the late afternoon light wash over the streets as if the world was trying to offer a kind of absolution. I replayed the moment in my head again and again. The gasp, the silence, the way everything slowed down. I remembered Emily's face, frozen in horror, and the way no one else moved until I did. That was the part that stuck with me most, not the choking, not the Heimlich, not even Lily's tears, but the way I had stepped in when no one else did. The way I had to. The way I always had to, and I wasn't bitter. Not anymore. I wasn't interested in holding grudges or crafting some elaborate revenge arc where Emily got what she deserved. Because the truth was, life had already delivered the most honest verdict. In the moment that mattered, titles didn't matter. Medals didn't matter. Salaries, degrees, flashy job descriptions, none of it stood between life and death. I did. And that truth was stronger than any applause or apology. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I didn't text a friend or post a passive-aggressive message online. I took a long shower, changed into pajamas, and curled up on the couch with a blanket and my cat, whose only concern was the rhythm of my heartbeat. And for the first time in a long while, I felt okay not saying anything. I didn't need to, they had all seen it, even if no one said the words. Even if Emily never again acknowledged it. Even if my mother still introduced me as our Chloe, the nurse, with that smile that tried to be supportive but always felt just a little bit apologetic. It didn't matter, because I wasn't a guest at that party. I wasn't an ornament or a helper or an afterthought, I was the lifeline, and that kind of truth doesn't fade. It doesn't shrink back into invisibility. It burns quietly, like an ember you keep in your chest, warm and constant, long after the fire has died down. That night, as I fell asleep, I remembered the sound of Lily's breath returning, the way her chest rose and fell against mine, and I whispered one last thing into the dark: I've always been enough. After everything settled down, the party never quite recovered its shine. The music started again, someone turned the bubble machine back on, and people tried to find their places, but it was like watching a show after the curtain's already fallen. Everything felt out of sync. Half-eaten cake, sagging balloons, whispered conversations behind napkins. The party had ended the moment Lily started choking, and no one could admit it. I didn't go home immediately. I stayed for Lily. She wouldn't let go of my hand. She followed me everywhere, like a shadow that was suddenly aware it had a heartbeat. I held her through the cleanup, through the tired glances and the awkward thanks from people who still didn't quite know what to say. But the person I was watching most wasn't Lily. It was Emily. At first, she kept her distance. She hovered behind guests, poured wine she didn't drink, smiled at people she wasn't listening to. Her eyes darted everywhere except toward me. But I could feel the orbit of her attention bending toward me. With every step I took, every moment I knelt to talk to Lily, every time someone pulled me aside to whisper, "That was amazing," or "You were so calm," or "We're so lucky you were here," Emily didn't speak, but her silence screamed. Then it happened. I was tying Lily's little pink shoe by the patio door when Emily stepped out behind me. Her shadow covered my back like a curtain drawn too quickly. I stood up slowly, brushing my knees, and we stood there, sisters, but strangers, face to face under the pale light of a party that had forgotten how to pretend. Her face was calm, too calm, but the cracks were visible. Not physical ones. Emotional fissures. Her lips were drawn tightly, her mascara a bit smudged at the corners, her eyes glassy but dry. She opened her mouth and closed it again. I waited. "I was just coming to get Lily," she said finally. Her voice was careful, clinical. The kind of tone you use with a patient you don't like but still have to treat. "She's fine here," I replied, matching her tone with one just as measured. "She's my daughter, Chloe." And there it was. Not anger. Not thanks. Just a reassertion of territory. As if Lily's love, her instincts, her trust, could be assigned like custody. "I know that," I said, softly but firmly. "And you're lucky she's still here." Her mouth twitched. I don't think she expected that. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the little girl she used to be, the one who used to pull my braids when we played, who used to beg me to let her sleep in my bed during thunderstorms. But it was gone as fast as it came, replaced by that curated mask she wore so often now. Professional. Powerful. Perfect. Except today, the cracks ran deeper. "You did what you had to do," she said. "No," I corrected. "I did what I knew how to do. What I chose to do. Because that's what I've trained for. That's what I am." She didn't answer, but her hands betrayed her. Her fingers clenched the fabric of her dress like she needed to feel something to stay grounded. I looked her dead in the eye and waited. Finally, she spoke. I froze. And just like that, the glass shattered. 3 words. Quiet, cracked, raw. And behind them was a flood she couldn't control anymore. Her posture slackened, her shoulders sagged, and her voice dropped to something that sounded dangerously close to human again. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there. She looked at me, and I couldn't. I didn't move. You're not the only one, I said, gently. No one else did either. I'm a doctor, she whispered, like it was a confession. I should have known. But you're not a nurse, I replied. And you weren't the one who saw it first. Or moved first. Or acted. Being a doctor doesn't mean you always know what to do in a crisis. She looked up then, and there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years, fear. Not the kind that comes from danger, but the kind that grows from exposure. She was laid bare. And she knew it. She could have died, she said, but she didn't, I replied. Because I was here. That was the truth. Neither of us could walk around anymore. I was here. I always had been. And today, I wasn't just present, I was essential. We stood in silence. Behind us, guests were beginning to leave. Someone was collecting paper cups. The smell of frosting and warm juice hung heavy in the air. And between us, the years of quiet insults, passive aggression, backhanded compliments, they all floated there, invisible but undeniable. I've said a lot of stupid things, she finally said. Yes, I said, because pretending otherwise would have been a lie. She nodded. No protest. No defensive laughter. Just a slow, small nod that meant more than any speech she could have rehearsed. I don't expect things to be fixed overnight, she said. I don't expect anything anymore, I replied. I just want peace. And then, in the simplest, softest motion, she reached out and touched my arm. Not a hug. Not an apology wrapped in tears. Just a touch. And that was enough for now. Later, as I helped pack up the remaining cupcakes and full paper decorations into trash bags, people began saying goodbye. Some squeezed my hand. Some whispered thanks. And a few, surprisingly, looked at me like they were seeing me for the very first time. As if I had grown 10 feet tall and they were trying to catch up. Emily was quieter for the rest of the evening. But I noticed the way she watched Lily cling to me, and how she didn't pull her away like before. Something had shifted. She saw it now. Not everything, but something. Enough. When I finally left, Lily ran up and hugged my waist, hard. Bye, Coco, she whispered. Bye, sweetheart. Be good, okay? Okay, she said. You're my hero. I looked over her head at Emily. Our eyes met. She didn't speak, but she nodded again. That same slow nod. I took it with me as I stepped into the cool evening air, each breath feeling lighter, more full of truth. The illusion had cracked, yes. But so had the shell I had built around myself for years just to survive family gatherings like these. And now, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of being seen. A week passed like a shadow that wouldn't leave my side. The incident at Lily's birthday replayed in my head in slow motion every night. Her little face turning red. Her wide, panicked eyes. The stunned silence in the room before anyone moved. And my own hands, sure, steady, trained, but trembling after the adrenaline wore off. In the quiet moments, I could still hear the hollow thud of Emily's heels when she rushed forward too late. Still smell the frosting and plastic tablecloths. Still feel the way my chest tightened when I thought, just for a second, that I might lose Lily. But the part that echoed even louder than the moment itself was what didn't happen after. No follow-up call. No apology from Emily. No public acknowledgement from the rest of the family. The silence was loud. Heavier than gratitude. Heavier than guilt. It was a familiar weight, the kind I had carried for years, of being overlooked, underappreciated, made to feel like the less brilliant sibling who chose the less glamorous path. But now that weight had changed shape. It wasn't the same empty silence I used to fill with fake smiles and polite excuses. Now it was a silence waiting to break. Still, I didn't chase. I didn't reach out. I didn't stir the pot or expect a parade. I went back to work at the hospital, into 12-hour shifts that blurred into each other. Back to bandaging wounds, comforting families, changing bedsheets, and handling emergencies that didn't come with birthday balloons or family drama. Because that's who I was, dependable, solid, there. Even when no one was looking. Then, on a Tuesday night, right before midnight, my phone buzzed. It was one of those phantom buzzes at first. I almost didn't believe it was real. I had just collapsed onto my couch after an especially long shift. I was still in scrubs, still smelled faintly of antiseptic, and had been planning to ignore everything except the ceiling for at least an hour. But the screen lit up, and there it was, Emily. The preview read just one line. thank you. My thumb hovered over the message. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it like it might change if I looked at it long enough. Part of me thought it was a mistake, or worse, a formality, a family obligation. But the other part, the younger part of me, the one that used to hope Emily might see me as more than a convenience or an afterthought, that part was curious. I opened the message. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there. I keep thinking about it, about her face, about how fast you moved. I just wanted to say, thank you. No emojis, no disclaimers, no jokes to soften the vulnerability, just words. Short, plain, and raw. I read it again, and again. I didn't cry, but something inside me softened. I could feel it, the edge of my anger dulling slightly, the years of resentment shifting into something less acidic. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something like room to breathe. I stared at my phone, thinking about what to say in return. There was so much I could have said. I could have poured out every buried wound, every moment of invisibility, every time she made me feel like my life's work didn't matter because it didn't come with a lab coat or press mentions or framed degrees. I could have reminded her of the group chat, the dinner table snubs, the birthday comments. I could have said, it's about time. But I didn't. Because I wasn't writing from the past anymore. I typed back slowly, she's okay. That's all that matters. Then I added, I love her. You know that. I paused before sending it. I wanted to delete it. I wanted to add more. But instead, I just hit send. A few minutes later, 3 dots appeared. Then vanished. Then reappeared. Then nothing. And that was enough. The message didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years we had drifted apart or the casual cruelty that had calcified into routine. But it broke the wall. It cracked the silence. And that tiny crack meant something had changed. The next day, I was changing Lily's bedpan when the nurse beside me, a new one, fresh out of school, asked, "Weren't you the one who saved that little girl last week at a birthday party?" One of the paramedics mentioned it in the break room. I nodded. Yeah, that was my niece. She looked at me like I was something out of a movie. That's so badass. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I finally felt the tension break somewhere deep in my chest. I wasn't looking for glory, but it felt good to be seen, not just as the nurse or the helper or the sibling who didn't quite make it, but as someone who mattered, who had made a difference. Not once, but every day. That night, I went home and looked at the framed photo I kept in my kitchen, a picture of me and Lily from 2 Christmases ago. She was in my lap, wearing a Santa hat 2 sizes too big, beaming at the camera. Emily had taken that photo. I had never been sure whether she did it out of politeness or convenience. But now, I wondered if she had noticed something then that she didn't have words for. Later that week, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a group message, family group. Chat, new dinner date. There was a little heart emoji, and a second message beneath it, hope you can make it, Chloe. Lily would love to see you again. We all would. Sent by Emily. I didn't respond right away. I didn't even know if I'd go, but I smiled, because I didn't need to be the doctor, or the perfect daughter, or the favorite. I didn't need to compete in conversations or shrink into the corners of family photos. I had already proven what needed to be proven. Not with words, not with titles, but with my actions, with my presence, with my heartbeat steady while everyone else froze. I was the reason Lily was still laughing today, and no one, no chat message, no old wound, no faded insult, could ever take that away from me. I didn't reply to the group chat right away. I watched the screen as my family's messages trickled in one by one, smiley faces, jokes, photos of cakes and wine bottles, and beneath it all, the same old current of performative harmony that always blanketed our gatherings. But this time, something had shifted. It wasn't that they had changed, not really. It was that I had bet a few years ago, I might have dropped everything to attend that dinner. I might have shown up with homemade dessert and overcompensated smiles, trying to earn their attention like a child performing for applause. I might have spent the entire evening forcing laughter, dodging snide remarks disguised as compliments, nodding along as Emily spoke, waiting for someone, anyone, to turn their eyes toward me and say, "We're proud of you too." But Now, I didn't feel the need to chase that anymore. For the first time in my life, I understood something deep in my bones. I'm not just anything. Not just a nurse. Not just a sister. Not just someone they tolerate because she's useful in emergencies. I'm the reason Lily is alive. And that's not a boast. That's not a badge I wear around my neck. It's a quiet, immovable truth. I was there when it mattered. Not to be seen, not to be praised, but because I love that little girl. Because my work, my instincts, my training, they all existed for that exact moment. After the Heimlich, after the screaming and the silence and the shaking that followed, Lily had clung to me like a vine to a branch, her little arms wrapped tight around my neck. I remember the way she looked at me, not just like her tia Coco, but like the person who kept her world from falling apart. That memory had stayed with me every day since. Stronger than the message from Emily. Stronger than any group invitation. I didn't need them to say it. I had felt it in Lily's heartbeat against my chest. A few days after the message from Emily, I found myself sitting in the break room during a night shift. The hospital was quiet, a rare blessing. I was alone, eating soggy cafeteria fries, and scrolling through my photos. I stopped on one taken a week before Lily's party. It was of me, in uniform, mask down around my chin, eyes tired but proud. I had saved a man's leg that day, stopped an arterial bleed that another nurse had panicked over. No one outside the hospital had ever heard about it. No medals. No headlines. Just another day's work, and that was the thing no one outside the medical world seemed to understand. Nursing wasn't some fallback job or plan B. It wasn't what you did because you couldn't cut it as a doctor. It was precision. It was resilience. It was empathy weaponized into action. It was 1,000 tiny decisions made in the quiet spaces between alarms. It was being the first to spot a failing heart rhythm, the last to leave a dying patient's side, the only one in the room holding a child's hand while the machines hummed their final notes. It was everything. It is everything, and I had let that truth live quietly inside me for too long. I took a screenshot of Emily's message. Not to gloat, just to remember. To remember that even the ones who didn't understand eventually had to acknowledge what they once dismissed. That even the loudest doubters sometimes whispered thank you when the noise died down. The next time I saw Emily was at Mom's house. Not a party. Just a quiet Sunday lunch. She hadn't known I would be there. I hadn't known she would either. The moment was awkward, but not hostile. Just two sisters orbiting the same space after years of pretending we weren't drifting. She looked different. Softer somehow. She didn't start with a joke or a jab. She just nodded when I entered the kitchen. Later, she handed me a plate of food and said, "You're working tonight?" I nodded. 12-hour. She hesitated, then added, "That sounds hard." I shrugged. Some days. Another pause. Then she said, "I've been reading about pediatric airway obstruction." I raised an eyebrow. I just wanted to understand more. What you did. What to do next time. That landed heavier than I expected. The words weren't perfect. They weren't poetry. But they were honest. I saw the humility in them. The quiet effort. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But I said, "Thanks," and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like I was talking to a stranger wearing my sister's face. Lily came bounding in later, her curls wild, her energy endless. When she saw me, she ran and jumped into my lap like always. "Tia Coco," she beamed. "Mommy said you made me breathe again." I smiled. "I did. She said I should listen to you more than her now." Lily giggled, then whispered, "But don't tell her I told you." Emily rolled her eyes in mock exasperation. Traitor. We laughed. Together. Really laughed. That night, driving to work, I replayed the day in my head. It hadn't been perfect. Nothing had been fixed. But the cracks had let light in. And maybe that was enough. Back at the hospital, I clocked in, washed my hands, and tied my hair back. A new patient was being brought in, toddler with a high fever, inconsolable, parents panicking. I took a deep breath, nodded to the pediatrician, and stepped forward. This was where I belonged. Not as a shadow in my sister's spotlight. Not as the helper or the background figure. I belonged here because I was good at this, because I saved lives, because I had purpose even when it went unnoticed, and somewhere out there, a little girl with chocolate-stained cheeks and a lopsided grin was still breathing because I didn't need applause to act. I just needed love. So no, I'm not just a nurse. I'm the reason she's alive, and that, finally, is something even my family couldn't ignore.